Margarete Müller stood at her window, nervously watching American tanks roll into town. For 2 years, she'd been bombarded with Nazi propaganda warning of what would happen when the Allies arrived. Newspapers and radio reports painted terrifying pictures of what American troops might do to German women. That morning, Margaret and 7 other women from her street were told to report to the town hall basement. The local mayor informed them they'd been selected to serve as comfort women for the incoming American soldiers, supposedly to protect the rest of the town's women. Across southern Germany, Nazi officials had set up over 200 similar facilities in preparation for Allied occupation. These makeshift sites were often repurposed from schools, offices, or private homes. Their purpose, according to Nazi documents, was to provide a controlled space for occupying troops, allegedly to prevent chaos. Around 2,800 German women, aged 17 to 30, were forced into this last-ditch effort by the collapsing regime. A directive issued on March 12, 1945, laid out the plan, framed as a protective measure for the general population. The real purpose, however, was psychological control. Nazi propaganda had painted U.S. soldiers as dangerous, claiming they'd been promised German women as part of the spoils of war. Some flyers even claimed American units were made up of convicts and the mentally ill. This propaganda hit home because of what German troops themselves had done during the war. Between 1940 and 1944, the German military set up more than 500 brothels across occupied Europe, forcing about 34,000 women into sexual slavery. Nazi leaders assumed the Allies would behave the same way. Women like Margaret were terrified. Many considered suicide. In Regensburg alone, 27 young women killed themselves in April 1945 rather than face what they had been told was coming. Some prepared poison, ready to end their lives if things became unbearable. But what happened next wasn't what they expected. Instead of chaos or violence, the American arrival brought something completely different: discipline and respect. It wasn't part of a PR campaign. It was a result of months of planning by the U.S. military. Before deploying, American troops were given a 32-page handbook called Pocket Guide to Germany. Over 1.6 million copies were distributed. In their training, soldiers were told clearly, German women are not your reward. Eisenhower's first order for occupying forces banned any kind of fraternization. Officers warned troops that breaking these rules could mean losing rank, losing pay, or even going to prison. Unlike in previous wars, the U.S. military had created a strict system to prevent inappropriate behavior. There were 12-hour training sessions on how to interact with civilians. Military police had even more intensive training. Officers attended ethics courses at the University of Virginia, where they were reminded that how they treated civilians, especially women, reflected on America as a whole. The Pocket Guide reminded soldiers they were representing democracy and that their behavior should show how it differed from the dictatorship they were replacing. It outlined clear rules: no entering homes without permission, no making German women do personal chores, and no unnecessary conversations. Each soldier had to sign a form saying they understood these rules and could be randomly checked to ensure they had the guide with them. Every unit had an officer specifically assigned to enforce these policies. Military police regularly patrolled to monitor behavior. Before deployment, violations of these rules were punished heavily to make the point clear. Over 200 soldiers were disciplined in just 3 months of training. General Patton made it personal. In February 1945, he told his officers how their men treated German women would help shape the German public's view of democracy. His message was simple: stay professional or face consequences. This wasn't just about maintaining order. It was about countering Nazi propaganda. If German women expected abuse but were treated with dignity, that contrast would speak louder than any speech. Special attention was given to African American troops. About 40,000 black soldiers received training that included how their conduct could fight both Nazi racism and racial stereotypes back home. Their respectful treatment of German civilians helped challenge multiple prejudices at once. As U.S. forces entered Germany in spring 1945, they carried not only weapons but also strict behavior codes. Meanwhile, the German women labeled as comfort girls were about to meet soldiers trained to keep their distance. An American lieutenant walked through the Hoffman family home to determine how much space could be used for troops. He kept his distance, about 10 feet from the women in the house, and marked their bedrooms as private. He also arranged for the soldiers to use a separate entrance and share the bathroom on a schedule that gave the family privacy. Scenes like this played out across Germany. Troops used standardized forms to ensure German women had clearly defined personal space. Rules require their rooms to be separated from American quarters by at least one room, with doors locked. In Heidelberg, a 19-year-old named Greta Schultz wrote in her diary that she hid in the basement when the Americans arrived, expecting violence. But after hours passed, her mother called her upstairs. 2 soldiers were quietly eating their own food and then went to sleep in her father's study. "They barely looked at us," she wrote. The U.S. enforced these policies in detail. In homes of American troops, 93% had door signs marking female spaces off-limits. German women had to sign confirmation that U.S. troops behaved properly, creating a paper trail of accountability. Language barriers also helped prevent close contact. Only 8% of U.S. troops spoke basic German, so translators had to be present during any civilian interactions. This formality made even simple conversations professional. The military even distributed 26,000 English-German phrase cards strictly for official use. In Regensburg, where the Nazis had set up a comfort station with 24 women, U.S. counterintelligence sealed the building and posted guards to block access. The women were questioned, then sent home or housed safely. Their records were changed to list them as refugees to protect their privacy. One of those women, Helga Weber from Augsburg, later told Red Cross investigators that she and others were terrified when U.S. troops entered. But instead of violence, female medics came in, talked to them in private, and arranged for them to go home. "We were told we were free to leave," she recalled. It didn't make sense. It was the opposite of everything we'd been told. During the first month of the occupation, there were 57 confirmed violations of the no fraternization rule, leading to 41 court-martials. The military newspaper Stars and Stripes covered these cases to show that the policy was being strictly enforced. In contrast, Soviet forces in eastern Germany followed very different protocols, with estimates showing that over 240,000 German women were victims of sexual violence during the same period. As time went on, German women's fear gave way to confusion, and eventually to re-evaluation. The Nazi warnings had failed, not because of counterpropaganda, but because of everyday actions that proved those warnings wrong. May 1945, Heidelberg, Baden-Württemberg. Colonel Robert Murphy looked over the official U.S. policy document GCS 1067. It outlined every part of how U.S. troops were to interact with German civilians, down to how far apart they should stand while speaking. The rules were detailed. Separate sleeping areas, no direct aid without going through German authorities, and only gender-matched medical services when possible. Social talk was banned. Punishments were tiered. First offenses cost a rank and a month's pay. Second offenses led to court-martial and confinement. And third violations could result in a dishonorable discharge and up to a year in prison. Between April and December 1945, over 1,500 troops were disciplined for breaking these rules, showing that enforcement was consistent. Military buildings and zones were color-coded. White for permitted access, gray for official business only, and black as completely off-limits. About 78% of residential areas were marked black, especially where single German women lived. American occupation zones were marked with clear signs, and military police made sure the rules were followed with patrols rotating every 3 hours. Curfews were enforced to separate soldiers from civilians. In 67% of the towns, U.S. troops had to stay in after 9 p.m., while local Germans were ordered inside by 7 p.m. This 2-hour window meant only military police were on the streets, reducing any chance of unsupervised interaction, especially at night. Food and medical help were distributed using structured systems designed to avoid direct contact. American supplies went to local German authorities, then down to neighborhood centers, and finally to households. No handouts from U.S. troops. Medical care followed a similar setup. German civilians and American personnel were treated in separate places, and when American doctors had to help civilians, a German doctor and a neutral observer had to be present. Even short conversations were tracked. Any time a U.S. soldier spoke with a German civilian for more than 5 minutes, they had to fill out a form noting the time, reason, and witnesses. Over 217,000 of these reports were filed in 1945 alone, showing how seriously the military took these policies. As time passed and routine settled in, German women began to notice the difference between what they'd been told and what they actually saw. Elsa Schmidt in Nuremberg wrote in her diary, "We barely see the Americans. Food comes through our own officials. If they have to come inside, they arrive with a woman who translates. It's formal and distant, not at all what we were warned about." By August 1945, things had shifted. A revised order relaxed the rules slightly, allowing limited public conversation, but still banning visits to homes. The goal was to keep protections in place while easing overly strict restrictions that were no longer useful. This organized and careful way of managing contact broke down the final lie of the Nazi regime. Women who had been terrified of American soldiers were instead met with systems built to protect them. That contrast had a powerful psychological impact. October 1945, Stuttgart. Margarete Müller, once one of the women told to expect abuse, now worked in a U.S. military office as a translator. "At first, I thought the politeness was fake," she wrote in a letter later archived in Baden-Württemberg. But day after day, the respectful treatment didn't change. Eventually, every scary story I believe started to fall apart. This experience wasn't unique. Psychiatrist Dr. Anna Merkel studied over 200 women who had been labeled comfort girls. Her findings showed a pattern. Initial fear, followed by surprise, and then serious questioning of Nazi ideas. When the main warning about being harmed turned out to be false, many women started doubting other beliefs too. Ideas about race, authority, and Germany's place in the world. Military surveys supported this shift. Approval of the American presence among German women jumped from 14% in May to 72% by the end of the year. The change was strongest among women working directly with Americans in offices and translation roles. Over 37,000 German women were employed in this way by late 1945, and their personal experiences helped reshape how communities saw the occupying forces. As months went by, cultural exposure helped even more. Though strict rules remained, Americans launched official programs for limited contact. By November, they had opened 87 America houses across Germany, offering books, music, and political education. Women made up nearly 2/3 of all visitors in the first year. For many, it was their first chance to learn about democracy without filters or fear. Surveys showed the effect. Among women who work with Americans, 81% supported democracy by spring 1946, nearly double the rate of those without such contact. The change was even more dramatic among former comfort girls. 93% later said they supported democratic government. As trust grew, restrictions slowly eased. In July 1945, public conversations became allowed. By October, soldiers could speak with children. By December, adults could have limited social contact in public places. Interestingly, as the rules relaxed, violations went down, suggesting the early discipline had set new expectations that stuck. Despite the rules, relationships did form. Between 1945 and 1949, more than 14,000 German women married American servicemen. The first wedding happened in August 1946, after the policies changed to allow it. These marriages were carefully vetted, with background checks and commanding officer approval. The wait time averaged 6 months. Around 94,000 children were born from these relationships between 1945 and 1955, living proof of how drastically things had changed. Personal writings from the time show how German women began to feel safe and accepted. Helga Brandt, who once hid for 3 days when Americans arrived in Munich, wrote to her sister in October 1945, "I went to a concert organized by the Americans. Halfway through, I realized I was sitting alone in a room full of foreign soldiers, and I felt completely safe. That's when I understood how badly we had been lied to. By 1947, the shift was clear. Women who had been trained to fear American troops now spoke confidently about politics, rights, and dignity, ideas once foreign to them. Real-life experiences had done more to change minds than any re-education effort could have. July 1955, Schrobenhausen, Bavaria. Margarete Müller, now Margarete Wilson, pushed her baby stroller to the same town square where, 10 years earlier, she'd stood frozen with fear. Her journey was one many German women shared. The respect shown by U.S. forces during those early days of occupation had left a permanent mark, not just personally, but on the country as a whole. Long-term research tracked these changes. A study by the Institute for Demos-Copy-Allensbach found that women who had interacted directly with American troops were 37% more likely to participate in democratic politics than similar women without that contact. The impact wasn't just immediate. It carried over to the next generation. A 1960 study by Drive Elizabeth Koenig found that among 173 former comfort girls, 89% had become active in democratic life, far more than the general female population at the time. The moment they realized the lies about American soldiers weren't true, they began to question everything else they'd been told. This shift affected their children, too. In the 1970s, the University of Munich found that daughters of women who had experienced American occupation were more likely to go to college, support women's rights, and take part in politics. These democratic values have been passed down more effectively through lived experience than through textbooks. The cultural impact was seen in books, movies, and art. A 1953 novel by Louise Rinser told the story of a woman marked as a comfort girl who finds dignity instead of shame. The 1959 film The Bridge of Hope followed a similar theme and became a major hit, both in Germany and abroad. Academic interest in the topic continued. Professor Maria Hearn's 2001 study GIs and Fräuleins analyzed over 12,000 accounts and found that the disconnect between Nazi warnings and American conduct played a key role in spreading democracy, especially among women deeply affected by Nazi ideology. The numbers speak for themselves. Between 1945 and 1949, reported sexual assaults in the American zone totaled 1,336, with a 95% prosecution rate. Over 128,000 German women worked for U.S. forces, and more than 14,000 married American soldiers. Respect, not re-education, drove change. Women's political participation rose sharply, contrasting Soviet repression. Margarete's journey symbolized a shift that helped rebuild West Germany through dignity, trust, and democratic values.